So, what is the number one principle? There's one principle that I have been able to boil things down to that is the source of all suffering. And it's not attachment because attachment is rooted in this. And the answer to your question is always rooted in this. So, technology. Is technology good or bad? So that's going to be our very, basic question. Well, let's look at that in terms of the principle. In principle, there really is no good or bad.
I don't
It
know
all
if if technology being good or bad is the question. I think it's
maybe not. Yeah, no.
the enjoyment of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Is it sucking you in? Like, that slippery slope.
Yeah, and it all still leads back to the same thing. So we'll go with that. So let's go with what Donna said. What do we want to focus on? Not the oh, starting to that's the bottom line is that we look at the harmonizing factor. And again, this is the way we talk. Balance, sometimes we look at that. And this is just I thought about this all week. It just kept reoccurring. There's this idea that it is really difficult for the mind to wrap itself around certain ideas, so it oversimplifies it without you even knowing. Trillion. That's just one word. I mean, how many letters are in the word trillion? It's easy. I get it. I know how much that is. I can write it down on a piece of paper with a certain amount of zeros, and I know that that is 1 trillion, right? But it is really staggering of a number. And the mind really sometimes has trouble seeing it in that full perspective. Why? Because it's used to narrowing things down for safety. That's the mind in an evolutionary context hasn't really had the need to think about, things in that aperture where it's more out and expanded. There's usually not a lot of reason for that. That I think that we have talked about that happens on an evolutionary level when it gets to the top of the food chain, or it is allowed to relax a little bit, and then it's like, all right, what can we do with our focus? Well, let's start to expand it. Oh my God, I see myself. Oh my God, I see myself with others. Oh my God, I see more than self and more than others, and et cetera. But so the bottom line is that the mind is used to reducing things and it's used to looking at things in separate pieces. So you and I can sit here and say that we understand balance. We understand inclusion versus exclusion, right? But that's not occurring. There is no versus. There is no balance. Not really. Not the way that our mind wants to, because otherwise, if we were going to be more accurate, we would say balancing, because it's a continuous process. Harmonizing. So to Ida's point, or to Ida's, question, and then there's two huge parts to this, and you said them both yourself. So the first huge part is the source. The source is an imbalance. Something is not harmonizing, right? There's way too much of something, which could imply that there's less of something else, but that's not always the case, right? So I could show you that on a whiteboard, but I don't think it's necessary. So the idea is that something is no longer in harmony, and that's what all the destroyers fundamentally were. And we had always said that, right? But we parsed it out because people have lives. I went through some things this weekend. You guys probably went through something to some extent, whether it's holy shit or I'm subtly noticing that I have this tendency to dot dot dot. So something is unraveling in our daily basis if we're doing this practice. Because if you're doing this practice, you recognize that there are levels of consciousness, and there is an aspect to consciousness that I'm not fully aware of. There has to be. It's just it's embedded in this idea of there is no distinct opposites. These things are engendering one another. They're transforming into one another. And it creates that new third thing. And it's so easy to talk about. But then as soon as we leave this session, our mind starts to divide things back again. So the practice is what starts to bring these things that seem like maybe opposing opposites or four corners of a direction. and brings it into a spherical type thing that you're engaging. And now you're engaging this concept of balancing and harmonizing. So the number one thing towards what Ida wants to talk about is fundamentally we are sensing that a harmony is out of balance. It's not harmonious. Like and anything we're talking about is relative. Relative harmony, right? Because nothing is ever perfect 50-50 and nothing is ever at this ideal state of balance. That would be a relative thing. What is an ideal state of balance? That has to have some definition to it. So no matter what it is, no matter what the destroyer, whether it's you're starting to get popular, people are starting to like your stuff, that fundamental principle of how much is something compared to how little is something, and our mind parses that out so that we can work with it. So, but how do we know that? That's the other question, you know? So if we had our beginner in the group, they'd be like, well, how do we know? How do we know when we're in balance? And how do we know when we're out of balance? You know, do I have like, can AI tell me, do I have some sort of chart or equation that I can use? And I used to do that. And I still can, equations can be fun. I can demonstrate that. But ultimately, with this group, especially, we know that it comes down to how we feel, because how you feel is the expression of your harmony in that moment. So the thing that we erroneously do is we parse out our own existence. We have a mind that's separate from a body that's separate from a mind, a spirit that's separate from both of them. And then now we start talking about putting them back together again. They were never separate. There is no such thing as past and future. The past is just a memory in my mind, and the future is just my imagination. Without those two things, you're ever present. There is no alternative. So really, we're just talking, the mind is just doing its damn thing and parsing things out so that we can work with them. That's what the five phases is. That's what the cardiovascular system is. It's an explanation. We're trying to put things in a group so that we can work with them, so that they become something reliable. So what's reliable in this situation, Ida? How you feel is going to be almost directly proportional to some sort of harmonious factor, whether that's harmony in your own mind, harmony in your own heart and intention, harmony with you and the world around you, you know. In this case, it sounds like there's a lot of interaction between you and what we perceive as not you. In this case, it's the internet, it's the likes, it's the attention. And believe me, I've been through that, people, and then I personally felt like I was starved from certain things growing up. So when I would get attention, I would be like extra woo woo, like, whoa, maybe somebody who grew up the captain of the football team and they had that their whole lives and they had tons of attention by the time they get to 40, whatever age I was at the time, they'd be like, I'm used to that. No problem. See, it's all relative. Everything is relative to the pattern. A human being is a walking pattern at all times. The world around you is an expressing pattern. You just have to be able to recognize the patterns in yourself, recognize the patterns seemingly outside of yourself. And this practice, if we're doing it, will synthesize everything back together. So the big thing is harmony is is the fundamental principle. And when things are out of harmony because of existing in an extreme for a period of time, no matter what it is, will cause the system to suffer, and the universe is trying to rebalance it in a way that can be very uncomfortable for us or even cause yin and yang to separate for us completely. It's like, nope, there's too much imbalance in this structure, so it's time to disperse it and we'll try again later. It'll recoalesce as something different, a raindrop perhaps. So we have the fundamental principle of harmonizing, and what happens when things aren't harmonizing is the source of all suffering. Okay, so we got that. Well, how do you feel? Feel in conflict, you're not in harmony. Are you even questioning things? Are you even talking about it in your there is a semblance of harmony that is disrupted if it's even occurring to you in a mental way, like in words. So all of this is an expression of either feeling a disharmony, even a suspicion. You're starting to feel it early.